It starts with Israel attacking Iran. The plan is for either Iran or for China to retaliate after Iran is struck with a nuclear weapon. At that point, there will be a limited nuclear exchange in the Middle East, followed by a ceasefire. He heard this being planned in this meeting. This is being choreographed. The idea is that as the world looks upon this with horror, then they will demand from their governments that there are heavy controls over travel, over communication, over people who meet, over people who protest in the streets. And because people will be driven into fear by this, they'll request and demand and insist on heavy controls from their governments, which will be justified. And this is where you're going to kind of get the martial law situation in all the Western countries.
Think quite carefully about conscription. Think quite carefully about conscription. Think quite carefully about conscription.
Say no.
Think quite carefully about conscription.
They simply say no. And that's what we all should do. Because this will end if we simply say no. do today. They simply say no. And that's what we should do. Because this will end if we simply say no. No.
If white male goes to war, white male goes to war, women will be left, women will be left, women will be left.
And this is where you're going to kind of get the martial law situation in all the Western countries. And then, he said, then the real war starts.
Do you know what? Sometimes I can be so thick. Sorry about that. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Wise Asylum once again. Thick Sean forgot to put his hand on. I'm sure that's what I'm getting told off about. Yep, there we go. Everybody's calling me names. I don't blame you neither. I'd call me names as well if I were watching this. Right, we're on. I'm sorry about that, chaps. So I'll just reiterate. I'll just say La La Land has gone berserk. Turkey's now in the mix. It's moved its missile system. Excellent start, yeah. Thanks for that. It is a good one. It's always good when I cock it up. Sorted. We're on. We're done. Right, everything's groovy. Do you know, and I thought I was doing really well. Anyway, never mind. You already know I'm thick, so what else can I say? Right, where were I? Because I've completely forgotten now what crack were. I've broke my rhythm, man. Oh yeah, La La Land. I can't believe everybody's running on this script that there's Iran's the good guy and he's gonna save the world and implement the law and make things right. Whose fucking law? Whose fucking law is he gonna implement it? I'll tell you where we're going here. Well, look at who's all security now in all these shopping centres, in all these fucking supermarkets. What they're all waiting for? The Mahdi. Oh, and he just happens to be a Shia. A Shiite. Now can we see a picture better? And of course, as I've said before, Iran is just a proxy for Russia and Turkey now involved, and China. And that's not good. But people are just playing along. Watched a couple of interesting videos on the silver, where they're saying pretty much that the collapse of it early this month was actually a fake thing, when they saw that by looking on the miners themselves, the actual mines that pull out silver. Generally, they drop double the amount that it's said to be dropping on the map, and that wasn't the case at all. So the conclusion is that it was a fake manipulation of silver pricing, just on the paper money. But what we're interested in is the reasoning given for that was because they were obviously coming to the rescue of a big boy, i.e. big bank or big institution, and that was made so to cover that. So whoever it is, whatever it is, that they're shielding at the moment from collapse has had a bit of a reprieve, but from what I can gather, it's not going to last forever. And then you consider the moves that America have made in relation to IRS issuing audits now on silver purchases, which of course if you purchase through a broker or you purchase through your bank account, they know who's bought the silver in the US. And the idea being that as they're trying to implement this digital dollar, the last thing there's two things that are really a danger to this digital dollar. One being cash, and the second being silver and gold. Because obviously if you're coming you're going off the fiat and you're purchasing solid gold and silver, then you're outside the mix. So IRS has set this going so that they can force the Americans to cough it up as far as what they've bought and then tax it, thus keeping it in their system. And the fear is that if everybody comes off it, which they can see now, and instead of it being futures and paper silver and gold, which is what most people do, companies and such, people want it in their hands because it's the only secure way that you actually do have a form of currency outside the system. Crypto isn't outside the system, Bitcoin is. But crypto is not out of the system at all. It's in the system. It is a part of the new system. So that was rather interesting to suggest and see why that fake up on the silver collapse, the beginning of this month, took place. It wasn't real. It was just to protect a major institution, probably a major bank. Could even be BlackRock, I don't know, but probably more than anything it'll be a bank. So that's pretty worrying. But again, we're going to look tonight at just who are these Mongols. I mean, for many years now I've spoke about or suggested and hinted as we've moved forward that there's a real big area of landmass on this earth that we know very little about, and that's been deliberate, and that is what's at the other side of Russia. We've been told it's just a barren land, it's a wasteland and all this blah blah blah, full of tribes running around on GGs with balls and errors. But I have hinted many times that actually that's not the case. I've also pointed out this idea of Tartaria that's being pushed and being presented as being over there is a false narrative in order that they can push everybody's attention over there, because the core of the control of all this is centered over there. And that's the sort of theme I've put forward over many, many years, not just on live streams, but even in my written works for maybe 20 years, just hinting at it, because it needs to get in the mix. Now, I came across a guy who's got stuck into that a little bit, and I thought, well, we'll formulate that in the way that I see it as well. And two interesting books came up from this little sojourn as well, which is interesting. Now, I've put them up as on the website, and I've included them on the document that we'll look at. But what I've noticed is the main one is in French, so I'll have to try and source an English translation. But the second one is actually an English translation. And there's some interesting data in those two books. But what really started it was archived records of conversations had with Edward I, the Pope, the head of the Knights Templar, the head of the Knights Hospitallers, and an envoy from Tartar. And of course, this is at the time of the Crusades. Very interesting indeed. So I've reformed this data in the way that I get it and the way I've been putting it out there for quite a long time, and I'll present that tonight. It's very interesting, but it does again start to give us an insight into what this system really is that they're pushing in and who's actually controlling it, because we know that they're claiming to be of the Old Testament, these people, this Exarch system and the Noahide. But is that the case? Are these not just come latelys who've just decided to call themselves that, or anything else that suits? Which again is a theme I've tried to get across to people, that, you know, these elites don't really comply with anything. Anything religious, of course, because religions are based on an actual doctrine, but, you know, they're sort of convoluted to serve a purpose, and that purpose, of course, is always offering up power to the institutions that claim to represent that particular doctrine. So, you know, whoever controls these people are not actually conforming to that, the way above it, and it's serving their interests. So they don't really care what you believe, as long as you believe one of them. They don't actually give two monkeys. They don't believe a word of it, because it's just another system by which they can control everybody and secure all the fancy pants and prizes unto themselves. And so that's, again, you know, we get too fixed into this. It's that lot, it's this lot, it's that lot. But then we do know that there are three religions awaiting the return of something. The Jews are waiting for the Mashiach, the Muslims are waiting for the Mahdi, and the Christians are waiting for the return of Yeshua, or Jesus as they call him. So they're all waiting for something. Now, interesting in the study, when you actually study these rabbinical Jews and just how clever they are, it would be very doubtful that at this stage in the game they would be putting forward their Messiah in the Antichrist position. It wouldn't serve their ultimate purpose. But they have a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys that they completely control because they created it. And they're using those, that hive mind system, to carry out what it is that the Christians believe is going to be relating to something called the Antichrist. And that bunch of people would be Islam. And therefore Mahdi makes sense. They're waiting for this Mahdi, who comes with a prophet, by the way. He's not comes on his own. He comes with a prophet as well, just to further cement it. And this particular guy, if you look into what's written about him, he's not going to take no shit from anybody. You will do as he tells you, or his gang are going to chop your head off, or whatever, or run you over, which is what just took place here in Accrington a few days ago, when a car full of young Muslims, and I'm saying young, 22, 23, ended up having a fight with an homeless guy. But that weren't enough. Buggered off, got the car, come back, run over him, dragged him all the way up another street under the car, ripped his leg off, completely scorched all the top of his back, and killed the poor bugger, and then hid the car and thought that they could get away with it. But they didn't. Now, this is the thing about these incidents. Why and where I haven't looked at yet, I don't really know, but I've obviously looked at social media. But obviously, I was in the town on the Thursday. I think this happened on the Wednesday night, and it was the Thursday. And just sat in the cafe, I could hear people talking. And what would really, really strong theme that you were hearing from people was that I'm not racist, but I've had enough of this now. Now I'm getting to that point where I'm seeing these people for what they are. And that seemed to be the theme. So these incidents, they're not doing your sort of culture any good here, because it's working contrary to, you know, if you're looking and bigging them up, saying, yeah, God, they're going to Muslim warriors and all this. It's not working, chaps. It's going the opposite direction, and that isn't good for anybody. And I've made clear all the time, you know, the guys that were born here that call themselves Muslims, I know a lot of them, you know, they're pretty sound guys, a lot of them. They've been brought up here. They know the West as more than they know their own. And I do differentiate between those and the idiots that have been brought in here en masse in the last, let's say 10 years, but in a massive way since the book script. Those are not what I class as any culture. They are a subculture in the main criminals. And I believe there was 6,000 boats came in on the beaches here since January. 6,000 fucking boats. And you've got these dicks at Childcare Westminster, these cocks wearing police uniforms, claiming to be operating as a duty of care for you. Something's gone seriously wrong. You've got a bunch of military asswipes, command level, talking shit, focusing people's attention to Sunday Bloody Sunday, which were a psyop anyway. There weren't really that much blood. Anything other than our military brass are doing sweet fuck all while our country is being completely invaded with criminals, rapists and every other Tom, Dick and Harry from every backwater country you can imagine. Oh no, focus to just look what they did to our veterans. Let's bring our veterans. They're talking out their ass about everything that's got nothing to do with anything, so that you don't realise that the military and the police are allowing this. In fact, they're making sure it happens. Okay, and that's the game you've got going on in La La Land. Jimmy Savile's vagina isn't having a right good time at the moment because he's actually now been caught out as what he is, a fucking liar of the extreme proportion, you might say. The guy's a complete lunatic. And even his sister came out a few months ago and said outright, growing up with Keir, he told the biggest lies you can imagine. Well, I'm not surprised when Uncle Jimmy has been shagging you stupid since you were a little flea bag. You're going to create a fantasy world. That's why it's perfect. But you look at where they've had that guy before he got Prime Minister. The guy's been at top of bloody CPS. He's a barrister. You know, this guy's the biggest lying tossbag you've ever imagined. And so his sister says so too. And now it looks like it's actually been caught out. But it's not been caught out, is it? It must be time for somebody else to come in. He's got through what he needed to get through because he's a complete lunatic. And he did say before he come in, he's very happy to be like a dictator. And ruthless, I think his terms were. He's very happy to be ruthless. He enjoys it. So they've got quite a lot in under his little short reign, if he's to go. You've got Reform, doing deals with all sorts of nonsense. They're all full of it, completely and utterly full of it. But if you're playing along with La La Land and believing that you can still hold some kind of idea that these guys can sort things out, then you might as well jump on this Iran war and believe for a second that Iran is actually a good guy. I'm not talking about the Iranian people. They've been subjugated under a military occupation. Well, actually, since the 900s, I think, that's when Islam went in there first and invaded it. But, you know, it's had a lot of changes since then, and you go back to the 70s, early 70s Iran, you'd have thought you were in London. That's how westernised it was. But once the Shah and others decided, well, the guy before the Shah, actually, the Shah were put in there to counter the guy who wanted to take back his mineral wealth to his own country. But since 79, you've had a military, crazy occupation of Iran. And it's the same today. It's the same military occupation that everybody's bigging up as something fantastic. Like they're bigging up Hamas as something fantastic. The actions of the Palestinians are something fantastic. And I'm not taking anything away from the actions of Israelis. We know what they are. You don't need to bleat on about it. That's exactly what... And like I said before, Israel-Palestine, that was the same mindset meeting in the same place. Palestinians bring the kids up to hate Israelis. Israelis bring the kids up to hate Palestinians. What can you expect other than what you get? You know, like attracts like. That's how you have to see this game. But for the last 5 years, all I've heard here on England is Palestine, Israel. The fuck about your own politics? What about your own nation? Ridiculous to listen to this stuff. Palestine, you got every dickhead's flag going, except England. So go put a Union Jack up. That's the empire. This Palestinian flag, Israeli flag, and whatever else flag you want to put up are all part of the British Empire. So all that's happened in all this flag waving garbage is the British Empire just started throwing up its flags everywhere. This is England. England. It's not Great Britain. It's England. We're not Scotland, we're England. We're not Wales, we're England. And people have forgot. And they think UK law is law. It's not. English law. That's law. UK is presumptory statutes on a contract. Because you're stupid and your contract. And we've all done it. We've all been stupid. I used to be proper stupid. I mean, I'm probably still stupid to a point, as you saw at the beginning of this live stream. I can't even turn my fucking mic on. But you know what I'm saying? Everything's upside down and everybody's focused to shit that's not going to change anything. This whole script here that's going on is about China. Have got full control now. The Exelarch system is running everything. And it's the Exelarch system on behalf of China that is ensuring the Americans will not be able to move off the digital dollar. Trump is nothing but a puppet, and they've just done another charade pretending he's been attacked. Because it's not working. People in America can see through it now, surely. Only your hardcore numpties are going to be still hanging on to the guy. The guy's not his own man. He's not said anything decent since before he got in 2016. Everything he's said since then has been garbage. It's been puppeting somebody else's rhetoric or script. It's becoming ridiculous. But you can see now, Exelarch system is running the show. To hide the no-hide system, you're all focused to Sharia law. Rightly so. They are one and the same. Sharia law is like a subdivision of the no-hide. Because they're both based in the Talmud. But you're focused to the wrong... See it for what it is, and we need to oppose it. But ultimately what it's shielding is the no-hide being implemented at the same time. They're now actually training judges in the US. Guaranteed they're doing it here, too, to the no-hide law. Well, the no-hide law means if you're not one of them, you don't have any rights. You don't have any say. You are guilty until guilty. Because there's no innocent in it. So, get a grip. Stop this nonsense. Fuck Palestine, fuck Israel, fuck Iran. I don't care. I don't give a shit. And I don't want any of my fucking kids going anywhere to fight for any of them fucking housewives either. If you're going to fight on this land here, for this land. And nowhere else. And don't let any of these wankers called military, politicians, whatever this fucking king's supposed to be, tell you any different. None of these assholes are worth one of our fingers in a war for them. None of them. But for that to change, people have to wake up. And I'm tired of watching this social media extravaganza of people bigging up Iran. It isn't Iran doing the fighting, it's the military-industrial complex. That's what's doing it. And you're playing into it because you're fucking stupid. There's no two ways about it. And I'm sorry for being disgusting, but you are fucking stupid. Reckon with that, you might get somewhere and change the fucking game that you're in. Anyway, that's all for that malarkey. We'll do a bit of law, and then we'll get on to that document, which is very interesting, by the way. And we'll have a look who's joined us. So, Upward says, evening, Sean and all. Looking forward to tonight's subject. Evening to you, Upward. PY Music says, good evening, Asylum. Evening to you, Paul. Mew says, Sunday in Wise Asylum. Once again, in mates, welcome. Sean. Evening, Mew. Sean, will you be at the Sheep Farm event with Jeff and I? Them two dirty Yorkshiremen? Well, I'm going to Fuston. I'll probably ask on the first one if I can go to the second one. But yeah, as far as I know, I'm going. I'm going first one anyway, that's for sure. I don't know if they have any tickets left to right for the second one, but we'll have to see. John says, blessings, lads. Evening to you, John. Wayne Kitch, evening, everyone. Thanks, Sean. Evening, Wayne. How you doing, me old China? Long time no see. Paul says, evening, Sean and fellow mates. Evening to you, Paul. Tackle Bay Tourist says, hi, Sean, on the wide salam. Evening to you. Gary says, love from Ireland. Evening to you, Sam. John says, come on, man. Are you telling me off? He's telling me off there. You're muted. Oh, you shit. You're muted. You crap. Oh, no kidding. Excellent start, says Mew. Yep, there you go. At least you're not a Scouser. No, I'm not. I'm not a Scouser. Definitely not. Not that I have anything against Scousers. I have to be honest. I do get on with Scousers. Wherever I've been in my time, I've always got on with Scousers. They're good lads. And lassies. Where are we now? Well, lassies can be a bit gobby, can't they? They're a bit gobshite, some lassies, but lads are always alright. Beanbuster says, Sean, greetings, my friend, and big hello to all the inmates. Big hello, Ian. Welcome, me old China. June says, evening, Sean, and chat, evening, June. Jane says, evening, David, mods and chatters. Evening to you, Jane. China's got rid of half of its US dollars. Yes. Anthony DeMorse. Evening, inmates. Evening to you, sir. Upward says, Mupit treasuries. Okay, treasuries. US treasuries. Oh, right, treasuries, is it not dollars? Oh, okay. Yeah, true, says John. AMG says, evening, Sean. Stumpy Janet, Rizla, Mew, and all our mutants. I hope you're all well on this day of rest. Well, it's not bloody day of rest for me. I've been busy all weekend putting this together. Evening, AMG. Think Black Jesus, Obama is the guy. Well, don't forget we did one on the Moroccan Prince, if you remember. So, when we get through this tonight, it might just give you a bit of a rethink. Because when you actually look at what is happening here, and which group of Johnny-come-latelys are being moved into everything, okay? And remember, it's only a scapegoat. It's only a front thing first. It's the no-hide that's the ultimate gig. But if you can use numpties, you'll use numpties. Will you not? That's the game in any mafia situation. Shit goes up. Sorry. Money goes up. Shit goes down. There's always somebody fronting your moves. That's the way it works. And it can only happen if you accept it, because you've joined it, or you're thick and you don't really know what's going on. So there we go. Think Black. Oh, okay. Check a bit here. It says no audio. Oh, thank you for that. Yeah. Sounds perfect. You must only have just started the podcast. No, I would think. We have the English flag there. Well done, that man. Right. AMG. Not a fan of Scousers myself or the Cornish. Well, I have to say, AMG, I love Cornwall. I've never had about anything from Cornwall, so I don't know about that. Scousers, you know what, right? They're just loud. That's the thing about Scousers. They're very loud. But, you know, when you get into them, they're a fucking good bunch of lads. I mean, they've had a lot of changes since Duke of Westminster got in there and fucked it all up with Common Purpose, and then they got Liverpool 1. Liverpool isn't the same place as it once was. That's absolutely known. I know anybody from Liverpool can see that. That used to be our Northern Rebel territory, that. You can't say that anymore, though. That's really sad. Right, I want to go just do a bit of a continuation on this law. It's only brief, so we don't have to go at it. Where are we? Aha. There we go. Let's have a little look at the prosecutor. Now, the prosecutor is an office. I've made this clear. We have to understand that in their system, there is an office, and then there is a person. They each have different functions, okay? So a prosecutor, a judge, a clerk, or offices. They're not... It's only a person in the office. They're like the monarch. The monarch's only a person. It's the office that's the key. That's where the rules are. That's where everything belongs in the office. That's what they take one of the oaths to. But then they don't do that because they take a secondary oath, okay, to the UK, which is presumptive. It's all presumption. So the prosecutor as a office, let's have a little look at this Johnny come latelys. Alright? Right, let's have a look. A prosecutor's role is to act as a minister of justice. That's what he's there for. Okay. He's not an advocate for convictions. So this is the office. The rules in the office is he is holding that as a minister of justice, and he's not an advocate for convictions or anything like that. Okay. He's not a hired gun, and not as someone whose primary duty is to win. So the office of prosecutor, it's not there to win, it's not there to get a conviction, and it's not a hired gun. Okay, that's the office. Okay, and procedure is all relating to the office. The duty is to ensure that justice is done. That is the office's standard role, and it should be followed without any form of ambiguity whatsoever. So let's separate it. Office. Okay, that's law. English law. English state, English law. The office of prosecutor. That's what he's supposed to do. Or she. In practice, now then, practice, as we all know that they're doing, is UK. Presumption. It's based in presumption. There are no statutes to support it, apart from garbage. It is not based in law in any way, shape or form, as I've been gone over with AI. There is no English law that supports and gives foundation or lawful capacity to the UK. None. Okay? So it's outside of law. And of course, if they're operating in that, then they're operating, as we understand it, as practice. Okay? Practice is what they're operating under. Now, in practice, however, the system does not reward procedure or the institutional role of the prosecutor. Okay? The office is bound by an oath to serve the law. In its pure form, this means the law of England and the constitutional commitments to due process and fairness to which the Crown is also bound. But that's the English Crown. Okay? There's another fucking crown, isn't there, in this practice shit, this UK system. Today, prosecutors often act according to practice rather than office. Well, I mean, I'm giving her a bit of leeway there. They always act in accordance with practice. They operate with an incentive structure that does not reward restraint, hesitation, or the dismissal of weak cases, which is what a Minister of Justice would do. The system rewards outcomes, okay? So like we discussed the other week about how public-private partnerships, it's a slow drift away from state law into corporate profit statutory rules or rules of contract. This is the same that's took place here. They operate within an incentive structure. And it does not reward restraint, hesitation, or the dismissal of weak cases. The system rewards outcomes. Okay? Because outcomes mean lolly. Doesn't it? You see, even if you get sent to prison, the prisons are private. It means lolly. Right? So everything now is based on outcomes. Because it means lolly. Not to the state. It's a cost to the state. Because your taxpayer is paying for it. But the lolly is going into private hands. Okay? Under this practice, all agencies and offices within the bar, now this is the Crown in this shit show, okay, work together to support practice at the expense of the office. That is why appeals often fail to gain support and appeal challenges an outcome. Judicial review, by contrast, examines procedure. So while we still have judicial review, what you've got to understand is appeals still operating on the outcomes-based UK Bar Association system, but the judicial review, by contrast, is still, as a King's Bench, if you present the correct format, the correct language, has to judge the actions of the office as the office rules been carried out by the actor. But you have to aim it at the office. Okay, it's a different language. Now, obviously, in your writings, you always want to hit the man doing business as, because you can always come for a private suit later. But if you're going to use judicial review, you can't play that game. You can't, well, I believe and I think you can't do that. If you're going down judicial review, you have to present it in exactly the format they need it to be seen, because what you're doing is you're asking them to make a decision on the procedure. Okay, it's important. This is why you need to keep the record. Okay? Because they're on practice. They're not even keeping records because they don't think they have to do. Because they just don't believe anybody's going to go down that far, you see. They'll go appeals. They'll put all these little ideas out to where you should go, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, while telling you that they're not giving you legal advice, of course. But this is this is where this case on the council tax has took me. And judicial review, while we still have it. Now, judicial review is therefore an important means of correcting systemic problems, despite the bar's practice-orientated structure. The bar has become a crown of outcome, rather than a lawful crown of law, rights, liberty, justice, and freedoms. In that transformation, rights and liberties become privileges, and duties become burdens and liabilities. Okay? In a practice-driven system, outcomes can oppose law, rights, and freedoms while supporting convictions, win rates, closure rates, political advancement, and reputations within the system. So the bigger of a Lighteller, the prosecutor, is, the better his reputation, because he's making more lolly for the bar. Right? This drift turns a nation-state mechanism of law into private-for-profit partnerships and substitutes contractual rules for law. People participate in the practice because of ignorance. The gap between what they know and what is being claimed against them. The gap is the joinder. Because that's where they get it. You know, I've talked about this void before, haven't I? You know, things come, you're void because you have no knowledge to play with. You're confused, then they hit you again, fear, bam. You've done it. You've complied. Yeah, that's the joinder. That's where they get you. If a prosecutor's role shifts from seeking justice to maximising conviction rates, and if that shift goes unrecognised, the pursuit of justice is lost, not only for the prosecutor, but also for the defendant. In that scheme, both parties act outside justice and entirely within practice. It is consensual ignorance, and both are bound by the outcomes. So, because it's a drift, even the prosecutors, in most cases, not the big boys at the top, they don't really know the difference anymore. They're just following practice, because that's all that the state system puts out. So they're bound by their oath to the bar, and we're bound by ignorance to comply. This drift is not necessarily the result of malice on behalf of the prosecutor. Let's be honest. Okay, let's play this fair. Prosecutors face pressure to produce speedy outcomes, financial incentives and expectations that have become normalised. Defendants unaware of the true position become pressured into ignorant compliance. This practice has persisted so long that it is now the default behaviour across agencies and offices in the judicial system. If no one insists on procedure over practice, the rule of law itself is eroded. Public trust in office holders cannot be sustained if the system is allowed to default to practice. The ignorance of the people has allowed this default to continue unchallenged. We are all implicated. So, you know, this is what I'm saying about this. It's not war mode. You're looking at this situation and saying, okay, you guys are tied, bound by oath. We've always been tied because we didn't know our ass from his elbow. Now we're seeing the picture, allow us to help you guys realize your error and put you back into the correct role, and then you can claim to be a Minister of Justice, and you can be claiming to be servicing law. So we have to work together. This is the point I'm trying to get to with all this stuff. It's a shift, I know, but it's an imperative shift. If we want to move our judiciary as well, instead of seeing them all as enemies like we always do, and think we have to go to war, let's recognise that they've been subject to a drift that's gone unnoticed, and the younger ones haven't got a clue. They don't know their ass from their elbow, because all they know is practice. It's the older ones that know the crack. They're the ones that are being a bit naughty. But if you're coming in on the contract, then they can administer that contract. It's a fine line. And I've said this before, in their system, they're still in honour. And that's because we're not pulling them. But we all know that when you do pull them, they have a set piece of crybaby stuff to play with. We know that as well. So they are being a little bit a bit naughty, let's say. Right. When confronted with practice, people are inclined to allege malpractice, misconduct, malice, and fraud. Those accusations assume bad faith, yet presumption and assumption are the very processes upon which practice operates. So when you recognise that actually it's all on presumption, not necessarily malpractice, misconduct, and malice, because in the system that they've been trained to, they're not acting contrary, and they're not being malicious, let's say. Not all of them. We know some of them are just out there for the pat on the back. But you get my drift, yeah. We have to change the way we approach this, is what I'm saying, from your mind, your core, so that you're not angry, because it blinds you when you get angry. You've got to see through that and recognise that it's a symbiotic relationship that we're looking for here. And I've had proof that that's true when they set me up in 2014, and I pointed out that we're not under English law, innocent to proven guilty. I'm defending myself because I'm under Napoleonic Code. And a barrister wanted to meet me. He met me, walked in his room, and he just stood up and he shook my hand and he said, it's an honour to meet you. And I'm thinking, what the fuck's going on here? I haven't got a clue. This is what I'm saying. They've got so bedded into this practice, they don't know. They need us to bring this forward. And I got that from a lot of judges back in the day as well, when I was trying my little bestest to get somewhere with this. They appreciated the effort, but I always fell flat because I didn't have enough knowledge to keep it going. Where are we? So presumption and assumption are the very process upon which practice operates. So it's got nothing to do with English law. It's a completely different game, and because we've come in ignorantly, it's operational. Thus, not only are office holders acting contrary to law, so too are defendants. Everyone in the system assumes there is no room for fact. So we're assuming they're right. We're assuming they're basing it on law. So we're full of shit as well. Do you get what I'm saying? Their assumptions and presumptions, and we're doing the same. And we're doing the same because we're ignorant. And they're doing the same because they're ignorant. They've been had practice shoved down their throat. Are you getting the... Can you see how we're equal in our ignorance? We are equally responsible for operating on pure presumption and assumption. That's what we have to change on an individual level. Okay? That's what we have to change. And if you can't see it that way, make no mistake about it, we don't stand a chance, because all you're doing is going to war, arguing. Well, you're expanding the case every time you bring another argument in. Oh, you've changed the whole game. There's more thing there for him to judge. You with me? So we're all in that system of assumption and demanding fact. None of us are dealing in that. Deception becomes the common currency revealing the real standing of the Bar Association as an institution that spreads ignorance among the hapless and derives power from it. And the hapless are including those that are trained in the legal system. We're all being had, and the Bar Association is the problem. It is the corporate crown. It is the crown that's given Parliament sovereignty. It is the crown that's put the English crown and the monarch beneath Parliament authority. That's the Bar Association. It is the corporate crown. It's not the English crown. And in the presumptive system which it runs, King Charles III is fucking nothing. He's subject to the will of Parliament because the Bar Association gave it sovereignty. It abolished the House of Lords to a point where it's just got its own in. Yeah, that's the crown, the Bar Association. That's the corporate crown. The system itself produces the outcome. There are office holders who knowingly act wrongly and defendants who lie. So it's the same thing. How many defendants go in there lying their little teats out and expect their judges to be true? You get my drift. Okay, it's good faith, coming in equity. We say these words. Clean hands. Do we have a fucking clue what they mean? No, I think we had to have a wash before we went in court. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? We have to change the way we see this, the way we approach it, and the best way to make it a little bit more balanced is to see that the people in the judiciary themselves are under the same spell. They need our help. Okay? But when the system incentivizes choreographed behavior, which is the practice, the line between justice and performance blurs. One looks through a looking glass darkly. Shadows become the focus and the light of truth is lost. Or we're no longer looking at the fire. We're looking at the shadows on the wall. When incentives override duty, authority no longer functions properly. It has been altered subtly but fundamentally. From that point, everything downstream is affected. Authority is lost, jurisdiction is assumed, status is assigned, standing is implied, and obligation is constructed. Do you get that? I'll do it again. So from that point, because it's on incentives, everything downstream from that is affected. Authority is lost because they don't have any. Jurisdiction is assumed. Status is assigned, so they're saying you are. And standing is implied. And then the obligation is a construct. That you are the legal title. Everything becomes a fiction outside the law, but we do not rebut it correctly. Enforcement then becomes inevitable, not because claims were proven, which is proof is what you need, proof of claim. Even the word evidence isn't a word we should use. But because the system expects results. So enforcement's got nothing to do with proof and fact. It's just a result that the system expects. And then you can say that the drift from law to statute has succeeded. Or presumptive statutes, yeah? The uncomfortable truth is that a prosecutor does not necessarily wake each day with ill intent. Rather, they wake ready to act with a structure that has redefined their role. The question shifts from whether an action is just to whether a task can be won. When that shift occurs, action is no longer grounded in truth, but in strategy. This is where CPS come in as well. If the system rewards prosecutors for winning and rarely punishes overreach, there is no natural restraint. You see, this is where judicial review comes in. Because it's all about overreach of procedure. overreaching the rules of the office. Now, I can tell you now, on this judicial, we put the judicial review in last week. I had to make an amendment. The land registry had responded, pop in the cell, okay, and I mean pop in the cell. And then they offered, get this, right? So all of a sudden, this is since June of last year. All of a sudden, they decided to tell us that, wait a minute, you're allowed to have a final review in the land registry itself. Well, it's a bit fucking late now, isn't it, you Johnny-come-latelys? Why didn't you tell us that before? Or why didn't you tell us that before you put the fucking restrictions on and pretended that you hadn't? But because they're not following procedure. Right? That's what they did. And when I sent these amendments back, they shit themselves again. All right, so you can see that you're really going for this, because I responded and said, we'll take your offer into consideration, meaning thinking, fuck, we're not interested in taking your offer into consideration. And then sent the amendment, and it was like, right, so you don't really want to do that. Well, blah, 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 blah. They're popping it. Because the processes that they've used to do what they've done, every single one of them has not followed procedure in any way, shape, or form. And judicial review is going to show them every bit of data that they've had and created to do what they've done. So judicial review is so important for holding them to the office. Do you understand that now? Does that really make sense to you? I mean, I didn't really understand the importance of judicial review, even though when I took the Queen to court, and this judge just fucked me all over it, sure, spent then about 5 minutes telling me why I shouldn't go for a judicial review on that decision. The thing was, at the time, I just realised in that instant that I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And I needed to go back and rethink this. Now, I had a bit more snout about me. I would have known to go to judicial review. But it's only in this last period that I've realised why a judicial review is different. Because it's holding them to the office, not the oath to the Bar Association. All right? That's your King's Bench. So that still should be, hopefully, under. If you present it correctly. If you present it wrong, it would go King's Bench, Supreme Court side, statutory. Yeah, so even that's double-edged, and it's the language. So if you don't do it correctly, they could still flip the Judicial Review King's Bench into Supreme Court hands, and then it would be operating in relation to assumption practice. But if you word it correctly and fix it to procedure in office, which I'm pretty sure I've managed to do, then that matter will be dealt with in relation to procedure of office, and this is why I can see the land registry shite in the pants. So who knows, we might get a deal. Let's wait and see. I don't know. I'm not going to. I have no idea what they're going to do. So when that shift occurs, action is no longer grounded in truth, but in strategy. Okay, because justice is about truth, isn't it? If the system rewards prosecutors for winning and rarely punishes overreach, there is no natural restraint. Natural restraint, okay? But you have to bring it. But you can't bring it as you're doing it. This is what I'm saying. You have to go through the process with them, but keep the record. You're recording everything that happened. What they did, what you did. What they said, what you said. Yeah? But obviously your rebuttals have to be... Your communications have to be good. Otherwise you'd lose it in them. That is why the public must act in the service of law and insist on procedure over practice. So that duty that's incumbent on all of us in relation to service in law, in relation to the roles of a constable, then we're applying that to operate in service of law in the judiciary itself. Yeah? That's where our duty comes in. That's where our obligation, if we want to keep the nation, comes in. It's all right saying, oh, well, I don't need to do it. He can do it because I'm watching football because my favourite guy's on and it's important shit and I think this manager should be great and it's just a shame because they got the wrong manager. What's important to you? Kicking a bag of fucking wind about and screaming and shouting, buying your kids loads of fucking garbage that they don't fucking need and programming them to the same. Or wanting your country back. Your nation. There's your choice. It's on you. Okay? Simple as that. You all know which one I took, which choice I took a very long time ago. In fact, 33 years ago. You know exactly which choice I made. Which is why I'm sat here gobbing off to you lot. That is why the public must act in the service of law and insist on procedure over practice. This is not a call to war, which it used to be, but a call to restore the office by resisting the bourgeois capture of the justice system through compliance that subverts institutional duty. It is the road to concealment of the facts. The role of prosecutor becomes a lie in direct contradiction to the office. So they're actually concealing facts in its entirety. And it's a contradiction of the office itself. When authority is compromised, every outcome is compromised. Justice is not being served, profit is. So if authority is exercised without full disclosure, it is exceeded unlawfully. So it's overreached, yeah? Because it's not given full disclosure. None of the fucking prosecutors do that. If jurisdiction is asserted while suppressing material facts, then it's not being established properly. So jurisdiction hasn't been established. This is in procedure and law. If the government's position relies on an incomplete information, its standing is weakened. Well, listen, look at just what's happening at Childcare Westminster this week. But it's the government itself, the parliament, that's weakened by these Johnny-come-latelys acting like tyrants. If the accused is responding to a partial record, no obligation has been fully proven. Now, how many times have we asked for a case management file and none comes? Because they haven't got one. So I'll read that again. If the accused is responding to a partial record, then no obligation has been fully proven. But if you're keeping the record, you're showing that the obligation hasn't been proven in its entirety. You are operating in the service of law. Even though you're operating acting for yourself, what you're actually doing in the bigger picture is you, by keeping the record, rebutting every point, being prepared to go through the motions, you are servicing the law. You are creating the record or keeping the record, as it were. Yeah? If enforcement proceeds under the said errors, it is execution based in presumption, not law. It is based on the lie. And this is what a lot of people are doing and trying to do with all these bailiffs, isn't it? Because you know, the execution of what these they call warrants isn't a lawful warrant. It's just bullshit. It's bullshit. But it's fear and violence that moves that forward for them. Is it not? No. Let me check that looks all right. Yeah. So, King Edward the First of England and the Secret Alliance. Okay. Mr. The Out. I noticed. Yeah. Oh, let's have a look. Okay, let's have a go fun. 85 tonight. So we've 85. So 27. Good grief. They really don't like these subject matter, I'll tell you now. Hey, good stuff. We don't care. Right. Now, it begins. This particular chap called Fulk of Anjou, who became the King of Jerusalem after supporting the Templars. Now, his descendants founded the Angevin dynasty on England, okay? So this guy, Fulk of Anjou, is important in just getting to understand what's the connections between the Crusades, England, the Pope, etc. Now, Fulk, Count of Anjou, inherited his title and fathered Geoffrey, his son. In 1120, he visited Jerusalem, joined the Knights Templar as an associate. So he didn't join them as a knight, he became an associate, and begun regular financial support. Around 1126, King Baldwin of Jerusalem, lacking a male heir, invited Fulk to marry his daughter, Melisende. Fulk transferred his lands to Geoffrey, his son, married Melisende, and became king of Jerusalem sometime later. Geoffrey later married an English princess. That's his son. Their son became Henry Plantagenet, or Henry II of England, married to that psychotic bitch, Eleanor of Aquitaine. And by marrying Eleanor of Aquitaine, created the Angevin realm. So from that marriage, we got King John, Richard the Bumshagger, and the rest, right? So that's the importance of this one particular chap, who just so happened to go off tighty-tighting, sired English Plantagenets, and then became king of Jerusalem. So mixed in with the Templars. So here you've got a mix straight away. Templars, English, etc., right? Henry II of England was the great-grandfather of Edward I of England, okay? Henry II reigned 1154 till 1189. He was the first Plantagenet king, whose son King John was the father of Henry III. So King John, Magna Carta, was the father of Henry III, okay? Who in turn was the father of Edward I. So King John had a son, Henry, who had a son, Eddie. All right? So the line is breakdown. Is Henry II, 1133, 1189. Son King John, 1166, 1216. Grandson of Henry II, or son to King John was Henry III, 1207, 1272. And Henry II's great-grandson, son of Henry III, Edward I, 1239 to 1307, okay? Both kings were central figures in the Plantagenet dynasty. Henry II established the Angevin Empire. Edward I strengthened the royal authority through conquests in Wales and campaigns in Scotland. By Edward's reign, the English crown had powerful family ties in the Levant, France, and England, and influence with the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Teutonic Knights, and the papacy. Okay? So by the time we get to Edward I, there is a massive, powerful mix here of power. Kings, leaders of knight orders, and the Pope. These guys are fixed together, right? And crusades on. Because Johnny Saracen has been conquering something like 28 countries in the space of like 5 years or something ridiculous. In 1241, under the reign of Henry III, so that's his daddy, Edward's dad, Pope Gregory IX appealed to Henry III to take up arms against the Tartars, who were plundering Hungary. Gregory agreed to transfer the crusading vows already taken against the Muslims to an enterprise against the Mongols. So in 1241, it were agreed with the knights in crusade that they were going to shift their oath, not only to fight the Muslims, but also to fight these Mongols who were plundering Hungary. And I think they were in Poland as well. The Crown of England was one of the first to respond positively when the Pope proclaimed a crusade in Eastern Europe in 1253. King Henry and Prince Edward assumed the cross and enrolled to fight in Hungary. Although Henry III fixed a schedule for his departure for 1256, due to the Negotium Siciliae, he did not fulfill his oath. Thus, after the 1259 assault of the Golden Horde, Prince Edward himself was urged to come to the aid of Hungary. So this is Edward as a prince then. As Khan Burke envisaged a great assault against Western Europe. The Pope also asked Richard of Cornwall to engage in the defence of the eastern boundaries of Christendom. Thus, from the outset, England acted normally as an enemy of the Mongols. Right. It must be noted that from the late 1240s, there were already a Franco-Mongol alliance, okay, in relation to the Levant, the Crusades in the Holy Land. And Edward I was highly respected as the only Athleta Christi, on whom all the Christian powers laid their hopes to withstand the Muslims. So Edward I was a real potent guy. Right? He was well respected, he was feared, he was tall, that's why they called him Longshanks, and he had an extremely aggressive personality. Okay, so he terrified everybody. In fact, I think one cardinal had an heart attack just asking him to lower some taxes. That's how intimidating Edward I were to his subjects, obviously, because you're a king, aren't you? You're going to have to keep that going. But some cardinal had an heart attack just asking him, can you stop taxing everybody? So you can get an idea why everybody held hope that this guy was the main king that would be able to be fierce enough to stop the Muslims. Nevertheless, it has to be noted at the outset that England, and especially her monarch Edward, had a primary role in the endeavours to establish not only political but strategic and tactical cooperation with the Ilkhans of Persia against the Mamelukes. So that it were the Saracen Mamelukes that were attacking the Middle East. And the Ilkhans were Mongols of Persia. Okay, so they were the Persian Mongols. And so he were looking to do a bit of an alliance there. So he wanted a strategic and tactical cooperation with the Ilkhans of Persia against the Mamelukes, and was based in the intent to protect the crusading enterprises, which had forced the Plantagenets to seek knowledge about the military capacity of the Mongol Tartars. Mongol Tartars, this is what they were called. So the Tartars were Mongols. But it were a term, Tartars, for all of the tribes in that area. Now, showing that they were not Scythians, which is what a lot of historians have tried to present the Tartars as being. They were not Scythians, which is us. They all moved into Europe. So the Tartars were Mongol, okay, Eastern origin. And that information made it clear that they had a superior military machine. So at this point in time, the Tartars, the Mongols, had a much more superior military might than any European nation. On England, Edward used his royal authority to establish the rights of the crown. So this is during his tenure. This is the kind of stuff he were up to. He replacing the old feudal system. So he were moving to just replace the old feudal system, basically, and establishing the rights of the crown, to introduce legal reforms and to raise taxes to meet the costs of war and government. In doing so, the role of Parliament and the common law became more important. During his reign, assisted by his Chancellor, Robert Burnell, Edward introduced many new laws. His son Edward II faced a different faction of Templars at Bannockburn in 1314. Because it jumps a gun a bit, but what's clear as we go through these snippets is Edward was thick in with the head of the Templars, head of the Hospitallers, and the Pope, okay? So these guys were all they knew each other very well. And even the Templars held Edward in high regard, okay? But of course, the Templars that his sons met at Bannockburn were a bit different, which is where I've said before, we have to consider that there were Christian Templars and Solomon Templars, okay? And this is why Scotland became a bit too obsessive with the old Judahite script as opposed to the Christian script, while claiming to be, where are we there? His son Edward II faced a different faction of Templars at Bannockburn in 1314, which highlights divisions within the knightly orders between those aligned with mainstream Christendom and those supporting alternative claims. The architectural evidence for this division supports the interpretation, which I expressed in the different versions of the temples. The Christian knights built the round temple in London, the Temple Church, and sanctified it to Mary, Mother of Jesus. Whereas in Scotland, it's a fucking not a square. What's the other one? A square fucking temple to Solomon. So you can see there's two different strains of theology going on in the Templars. What point that's changed, I don't know. But 1314, it would probably going from the onset, I would suggest. The architectural evidence show that, yeah, so that's what I'm citing there. Much division was had under Edward II with his nobles and France. So Edward II was a complete lunatic, and everybody despised him, and French didn't like him either. Things were unsettled on England until Edward III took the throne, and the Despensers were removed. The Despensers were like a family who seemed to be, they were thicking with Edward II, whatever his agenda was. And anyway, they got removed. And Edward III, basically, that's the guy who created all the chivalric orders, Edward III. So things seemed to move better when Eddie III got in. And that's just a brief history on England of the Eddies. So now we'll look at some history, okay? Who actually dictated the royal agenda is what we're looking at, in a sense. Of all the secrets guarded by the British royal family, the ones I'm about to reveal are perhaps some of the most jarring. Nicholas Le Lorgne is best known as Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller at Accra in the late 1270s and 1285, and as the author of several letters from Accra to King Edward I. Surviving catalogue entries and a small body of secondary literature identify his activity and point to a manuscript and archival sources. Nicholas de Lorgne, also spelled Lorne, is it Lorg? I don't know. Served as Grand Master of the... He's not fucking English anyway. Grand Master of the Knights Hospitaller from about 1277 till his death in 1285. He's associated with the defence and administration of key hospitaller castles, notably Crac des Chevaliers, and with diplomatic and military correspondence from Accra in the final decades of the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. Secondary literature and modern articles note that Lorne, we'll call him Lorne, wrote to many Western monarchs from Accra on military, diplomatic and health matters in the early 1280s. So he weren't just communicating with Edward. Origins and evolution. The Hospitallers began as a hospital fraternity caring for pilgrims in Jerusalem and gradually took on military duties to defend pilgrims and Christian holdings. The Templars were founded explicitly as a military order. Over the 12th and 13th centuries, both orders became major military and territorial powers in the Latin East. Now, let's just break there, because the Rome didn't create the Templars. They did not create the Templars, okay? It can't be said for the Hospitallers, okay? I think they were definitely a Roman bunch. But the Templars were their own creation, or something else. They were adopted by Rome later, but they weren't created or commissioned by Rome. And that's important. So they became a major military and territorial powers in the Latin East, okay? Both of them. Cooperation in war and diplomacy. On many campaigns, the two orders fought alongside each other, pooling knights, castles and logistical support for major operations. Their leaders negotiated with kings and popes and coordinated defence of frontier fortresses. Competition and friction. Because both orders amassed land privileges and revenues across Europe and the Levant, they sometimes competed for donations, commanderies and political influence. Local and regional disputes could arise, and their differing organisational cultures produced occasional tensions. Longer-term outcomes. The Templars were suppressed in the early 14th century. The Hospitallers adapted, survived and transformed into a territorial power. Later, the Order of Malta. This diversion shaped how historians view their relative roles and legacies. Now, there's a few links. Now, in truth, the Hospitallers pretty much scooped up a lot of the wealth of the Templars, or land and such. Not so sure the wealth went, but they took that way. But so the Hospitallers did actually benefit from the suppression of the Templars. And of course, I worked at John Lang's. That were a Knights of Malta operation, and we built fucking hospitals. So there you go. So this is the first archived data, and it's Nicholas Le Lorgne, Master of the Hospital, to Edward I, King's request for the. And you see, you're not getting the script, you've got to pay for that, but you're just getting the titles. It says description. Nicholas Le Lorgne, Master of the Hospital, to Edward I, the King's request for the return of Joseph de Chauncey, a possible alliance with the Tartars, dated at Accra, 1281, September the 25th. National Archives, Okay. Q. So it's Q National Archives, but we can't have them. Public records, language French, open document, and its publication note, bibliothèque de Oh. See? Never paid attention in French, as you can see. So this is an official catalogue entry from the National Archives at Kew that we've just looked at. It says the yellow race, motherships, and speaks of with the aim to divide the world in two. Now we've gone through that, haven't we? That motherships have made it clear in her prophecies that it's the yellow race that's trying to divide the world into two. And of course we all think China, but the Mongols and China hated each other as much as the Mongols hated everybody, it would appear. But it gets a bit more interesting later. Nicholas Lalonde, writing directly to King Edward I from the front lines at Accra, is not discussing a skirmish or a distant rumour. He is discussing a formal alliance with the Tartars. While current narratives have entirely scrubbed this name from the 13th century timeline, the primary records tell a different story. Excuse me. The historical archive of books indicate that this force had only emerged on the world stage 30 years prior, 1250. Yet, within a single generation, they were already a power significant enough for the King of England to negotiate a strategic partnership at the highest level of statecraft. This was not a meeting with a nomadic mystery. This was a pact between peers. The fact that this was happening at Accra, at the final foothold of the Crusades, shows that the Tartar alliance may have been the silent engine behind the world's most significant movements. So what he's basically saying there, that on the back of that is, we're supposed to believe that 30 years before this, they just arrived on the scene. Yet, for alliances to be made, for them to be known, for them to have power in the Levant, and etc., this is a long-standing, you might say, civilization that we've had convoluted, misrepresented for a reason. Okay, and then when you look at where everything is going in this New World Order, that's where it's going. So there's something in this. According to the 9th edition Encyclopedia Britannica, 1875 to 89, the article treats Tartars as a broad European label, traces the name to steppe peoples northeast of Mongolia, and argues that the bulk of the 13th century invaders were Turkic rather than purely Mongolian. It notes mixing with Volga Bulgars, Finnic elements, and Crimean Greeks. Representative passage, the name is derived from that of the Tartar Mongols. Under the leadership of his grandson Batu, they moved westwards, driving with them many stems of the Turkish Ural Altians towards the plains of Russia. Now in the 11th edition, 1910 to 11, Rothschild's own it, the article, longer and more fully referenced, repeats the 9th edition thesis, Tartars as a catch-all term for Mongol Turkic steppe peoples, identification with the Golden Horde in European Russia, and later conversion to Islam and formation of Khanates, Kazan, Astrakhan, and Crimea. Representative passage, after various groups of these Turkic nomads became part of the armies of the Mongol conqueror Genghis Khan, the Mongol invaders of Russia and Hungary became known to Europeans as Tartars, or Gog and Magog. Okay? Now, there's a lot of nonsense about who Gog and Magog is there not? And we're told it's Russia, but hang on a minute. We've just been seeing here in the Encyclopedia Britannica that we're talking about invaders of Russia and Hungary who became known as the Tartars. And they're the ones that are being described as Gog and Magog. Okay? And there's a couple of links. Before the Crusades, Venice had only indirect, mostly commercial and diplomatic contacts with steppe peoples, the groups later called Tartars. Most interaction came via Byzantium and Rus intermediaries, Black Sea trade networks and overland caravan routes, rather than direct Phoenician steppe diplomacy. Remember, I've always implicated the Venetians as the brokers between that side and this side. And from what I can gather, they were subject to this Tartar empire at that side. Okay. Right, Genoa, which early on was a separate entity to the Venetians, by the way, and it's the Genovese that had a major impact on this land. So the ties between England and Genoa were huge, hence the reason we have the St. George fire flag, the red flag, because it's a Genovese naval enzyme. That's where it comes from. And St. George comes all from that particular theology. Okay, this is where St. George and this comes from. It's the ties that England had with the Genovese, not the Venetians, but it gets mixed up because the Venetians basically subjugated the Genoans later, like they did everybody. So before the Crusades, Venice had only indirect, mostly commercial and diplomatic contacts with the steppe peoples. Most interaction came via Byzantine and Rus intermediaries, Black Sea trade networks, and overland caravan routes rather than direct Venetian steppe diplomacy, so they say. Genoa negotiated formal treaties with the Tartar horde authorities in the late 14th century that regulated trade, jurisdiction and territorial concessions in Crimea. These treaties illustrate how Italian maritime powers secured commercial privileges with steppe polities. So it would appear that the Genoans and the Tartars already had been playing for a long time. So, and then also we get these Venetians. Okay, remember, the Committee of 300 today called themselves the Olympians, but they also called themselves the New Venetian Party of the North. This is the black nobility families, okay, specifically. The Golden Horde controlled the Crimean littoral and major trade routes, Sarai, Crimea, the Pontic steppe, making it the political actor with which Italian merchants had to engage for safe access to Black Sea commerce. Military and political instability in the region, Horde-Rus, Horde-Moldavia conflicts, periodically disrupted Italian trade and forced republics to negotiate or renegotiate terms with local khans and governors. And then we have another few links. Now this is the second archive piece. Request to Edward, firstborn son of the King of England. So this is when he's still the prince. Okay? He's not King Edward the First at this stage. So they're requesting to Edward to dog his dad, get his dad on side, to persuade his father to take, and then it ends there. It says, request to Edward, firstborn son of the King of England, which was Henry III, to persuade his father to take steps to resist the invasion of the Tartars. Clamat in Urubius Letteran, 15 Cal, December the 6th. And that came from Alexander the Fourth. That's the Pope. So Pope Alexander the Fourth asked Eddie to get his father to get on board in opposing the Tartars. Right? You get that? And that's 1260. November the 17th. A Pope asking Eddie as a prince to get that on. Trade goods and routes. Venice traded salt, textiles and manufactured goods westward and imported grain, furs and raw materials that originated in or transited the steppe via Black Sea ports and Rus markets. These flows intensified as Venetian maritime reach expanded, but before the Crusades they were largely indirect. Intermediaries, Byzantine merchants, Greek and Slavic port towns and Rus riverine traders acted as the principal intermediaries between Venetian markets and steppe producers. Venetian ships frequented Byzantine ports, e.g. Constantinople, where goods from the Black Sea and beyond were exchanged. Marco Polo, 1254 to 1324, was a Venetian merchant and explorer famous for travelling the Silk Road to China between 1271 and 1295. And he served Kublai Khan for 17 years. His detailed accounts documented in 2 million introduced Europeans to 13th century Asian culture, geography and wealth. But this is not until 1271. So this is a little bit later, yeah? So we've got the 1260, they're not happy with the Mongols. In goes Marco Polo, you might say it's a spy, whatever. And from 11 years later from that request, they're starting to get a lot more data about Kublai Khan. This next piece of evidence takes us back in further, so that's the one that we've just looked at. So I'm adding stuff just to expand on who these characters are, basically. So the one we've just looked at, that archive, says the next piece of evidence takes us back even further to 1260. He will see a direct appeal to King Henry's son Edward to persuade Henry to take steps to resist the invasion of the Tartars. This is crucial distinction from the previous record. It shows that decades before the alliance was proposed, the presence of this force was already dictating the foreign policy of the English crown. Well, maybe not to that extent. The description notes this was a bulla with hempstring, an official papal document from the phrase clamat in aribus, it cries out in the ears, signals a level of extreme urgency. So that's the sort of phrasing that communication was sent in. This was not a report of a local skirmish in a far-off land. This was a high-level alert sent to the King of England, warning of a global expansion that was already knocking on the doors of the West. The timeline here is devastating to the narrative we've been given. In 1216, the Tartars were being framed as an unstoppable invading force, an existential threat that required the intervention of the Pope and the King of England. Yet, just 20 years later, that same king was negotiating a partnership with the Ma'akra. This shift from invasion to alliance reveals a sophisticated, rapidly evolving relationship between these two powers. But then, of course, you've got to recognise that we've also had Marco Polo's efforts in that period. Okay, so that, yeah, but then later on you'll get an idea why would this be. This shift from invasion to alliance reveals a sophisticated, rapidly evolving relationship between these two powers, one that the official record has spent centuries trying to minimise. The document showed a world in constant dialogue with a force that allegedly didn't exist in any meaningful way. Now, who's Alexander IV? That's the guy who sent that request. Born Rinaldo Conti, 1185-1199, was elected Pope 12th of December 1254 and died 25th of May 1261. He belonged to the Conti di Segni family and had been a cardinal under Gregory IX. Major policies and actions. He continued Innocent IV's hostility to the Hohenstaufens. Now, the Hohenstaufens were the Germanic Holy Roman Emperor's gig that served Byzantium. So they were in opposition to the Roman idea that was being built here in Europe. So they being the imperial forces, they represented Byzantium with Constantinople, which of course Church of Peter, Constantine set that up, right? So there we can see this is the division between Rome West and Rome East, and all the Roman emperors, or the Hohenstaufens as they were then, they were doing battle. So it began with Innocent IV's hostility to them, so that's where the problem started. But Alexander IV continued them. Now, excommunications and papal claims over Sicily, an investiture of papal candidates such as Edmund, and that's Edmund of Lancaster, by the way, supported the mendicant orders, notably the Franciscans, extended inquisitorial activity in France, and attempted to organise a crusade against the Mongol Tartars after raids into Poland. The Hohenstaufens held Sicily and large Italian territories that encircled the papal states. Popes feared an imperial power that could dominate Rome and limit papal independence. So it weren't just Hohenstaufens, it were a Byzantium problem. So this Rome, Italy had a problem with the might of the imperial forces from Rome, Byzantium. And in Europe, the Hohenstaufens, which were Germanic tribes, were their key players, their key power. Mongol policy was dual track. Rome alternated between appeals for conversion and submission and requests for cooperation against Muslim powers. A diplomatic flexibility that later actors, e.g. the French crown and the Ilkhans, which is the Persian Mongols, would exploit in the Franco-Mongol correspondence of the 1260s and 1300s. Alexander IV invested Edmund of Lancaster with the papal claim to Sicily. So here we've got Sicily being claimed by the Western Pope against the Hohenstaufen's claim and right to it, which they'd had for a long time. The Ilkhans, or the Ilkhanate, were the Mongol dynasty that ruled much of Persia and neighbouring regions in the 13th, 14th centuries. Founded by Hulagu after the Western Mongol campaigns, their polity, the Ilkhanate, existed roughly 1256 to 1335, centred on Iran and Iraq, and later adopting Islam under such rulers as Ghazan. The Ilkhans, or Persian Ilkhanan, were the ruling house of the Ilkhanate, a Mongol Khanate established in Western Asia after the campaigns of Hulagu, grandson of Genghis Khan. Hulagu was commissioned to secure the western portion of the Mongol Empire, and by the late 1250s has conquered large parts of Iran, Mesopotamia, and the Caucasus. Conquest and impact. Hulagu's campaigns ended the Abbasid Caliphate with the sack of Baghdad in 1258 and dismantled several regional polities, establishing Mongol dominance in Western Asia. The Ilkhanate's military and diplomatic posture shaped later Franco-Mongol and regional interactions, and its rivalry with the Mamelukes, which is a bunch that were taking over the Levant, and the Golden Horde influenced Middle Eastern geopolitics. So they were actually in a bit of a rivalry with the Golden Horde as well. So that's interesting. And there's a few links. Now, the next one is William de Béju, Master of the Temple. So this is the Master of the Knights Templar. So we've had Hospitallers, Knights Templar, and a Pope. To Edward I, the Tartars and the Egyptians. The Egyptians are the Mamelukes, by the way, the Saracens. In this time frame. Description: William de Béju, Master of the Temple to Edward I. The Tartars and the Egyptians in the Holy Land. Assistance is required. Dated Accra, 1276 to 1277, January the 10th. Okay, so the Tartars and the Egyptians, or the Saracens, were attacking the Knights Templar. So that's the third exhibit. Above introduces a play that shifts the narrative from diplomacy to the inner sanctum of the crusading orders. This record, dated January the 10th, 1276, is the correspondence from William de Béju, Master of the Temple, to King Edward I. William de Béju, also Guillaume de Béju, was a French noble who served as Grand Master of the Knights Templar from 1273 until his death at Accra in 1291. He presided over the order during its final decades in the Holy Land, a period marked by Mameluke pressure and the collapse of the remaining Crusader states. The correspondence concerns the Tartars and the Egyptians in the Holy Land, stating clearly that assistance is required. The Tartars, Mongol Ilkhanate forces, and the Egyptians, the Mameluke Sultanate, were overwhelmingly opposed in the Levant in the mid-13th century. The decisive clash was the Mameluke victory at Ayan Jalut in 3rd of September 1260, which halted Mongol expansion into the Holy Land and established Mameluke dominance. So the Mongols and the Mamelukes were opponents too. I think the Knights Templar just got caught in the middle of it, by the looks of it. In the standard version of the 13th century, the Templars are portrayed as the ultimate defenders of the faith. Yet here they are acting as a conduit for coordination between the King of England and the Tartar forces, where the Tartars are at the dead centre of the Templars' geopolitical strategy. Well, it could be interesting because it's going to make sense how, as we get further on. I hope it's not too long, this. In this, the Tartars were not a distant threat to be ignored. They were a primary factor in the survival of the Latin East. And if you note, the date it sits exactly between the warning of invasion in 1260 and the formal alliance of 1281, suggesting a bridge between the two events. It suggests that by the mid-1270s, the invaders had become so integrated in the survival of the Crusader states that the Master of the Temple himself was calling for a coordinated effort involving them. The document remains non-digitised, a literal piece of the puzzle that the National Archives keeps in a physical drawer, available only to those willing to pay the entry fee or navigate the bureaucracy. Or are we looking at the remnants of a three-way power struggle that the modern world has been told was a simple vacuum? You see, what we're starting to understand here is the difference between the Church of Peter and the Gnostic Christian data. Okay? This is where we're starting to see there's a difference. and why the Knights Templar were eventually subdued. Okay. The Templars knew exactly who the Tartars were. The King of England also knew. Papacy v Emperor. The conflict was a long recurring struggle over authority. The papacy insisted on spiritual supremacy and independence from secular control, while Hohenstaufen emperors, notably Frederick II and his heirs, sought strong imperial authority in Italy and Sicily. This produced excommunications, deposition, and the Council of Lyon in 1245. Military campaigns and a sequence of papal-backed crusades against Hohenstaufen rulers that culminated in the dynasty's collapse by the 1260s. Now, this is where the rise of the black nobility comes into play, because it was the black nobility that took on the fight against the Hohenstaufens. Now, I studied this, years ago, because it really interested me. So, it was the black nobility, the Venetians, okay, this is where we need to start to see this now, that demolished the Hohenstaufens on behalf of the Vatican. This is what happened. But then we say the Vatican, they weren't even in Rome in them days. The papal office wasn't even in Rome then, so we're not talking Vatican. We're talking Rome Pope power. So this is where the black nobility came into play. This is where they earned the stripes, by defeating the Hohenstaufens. And this is where the Venetian families begin to get power. And in fact, not only are they lending everybody money, but they're also now moving into the position of the military Holy Roman Empire position, okay, which was in the hands of the Carolingians from Charlemagne. Now, core issue: who held ultimate authority in Christendom, Pope or Emperor? Geographic focus: Italy and the Kingdom of Sicily, the Hohenstaufen power base, threatened the Papal States. Periods to prioritise: reign of Frederick II, early mid-13th century, the First Council of Lyon, 1245, and the post-1250 struggle over Sicily, Manfred Conradin. There's a couple of links. Political and territorial control: the Hohenstaufen held Sicily and large Italian territories that encircled the Papal States. Popes feared an imperial power that could dominate Rome and limit papal independence. Legal and ideological claims: popes asserted plenitudo potestatis, fullness of papal power, and the right to judge and, in extreme cases, depose secular rulers. Emperors defended imperial prerogatives and traditional rights in Italy. This legal clash underpinned excommunications and mutual propaganda. Personal and dynastic antagonism: Frederick II's personality, administrative centralisation, and conflicts with successive popes, Gregory IX, Innocent IV, turned rivalry into open war. Frederick was excommunicated and later deposed by the Council of Lyon in 1245. Crusade language was political. Papal calls against Hohenstaufens used crusading rhetoric to mobilise support. But these campaigns were as much about dynastic politics between Western and Eastern Rome as it was a holy war. But also take on board that at this point also you've got Western Rome sort of siding with the Mongols because of the battles with the Muslims. So we need to look at what was Byzantium doing in relation to the Muslim cause that the Western Rome didn't like, perhaps. Now, this is the next one. Now, this is interesting because I can't actually find any evidence of these people, John and James Vassal. There's no evidence at all for these two people. So I don't know what that means, but it's in the archive, so that it's there. Envoys of Abaca, Khan of the Tartars. So these John and James Vassal were envoys of Abaga, Khan of the Tartars, to Edward I, and they had a proposal. This is in 1276. Description: John and James Vassal, envoys of Abaca, Khan of the Tartars, to Edward I. Their proposal to visit England, other envoys of power only to buy falcons. So they were basically saying, we're different, we want to come and visit England. We're not the same envoys that usually come to buy falcons, yeah? Interesting. And then, of course, we don't get to see what's in it. But now, the fourth exhibit above shatters the idea that this was a distant secondary concern, dated November the 25th, 1276. We see a formal proposal from John and James Vassal, the personal envoys of Abaka Khan of the Tartars, addressed directly to King Edward I. The envoys conveyed their intent to visit England. We're not looking at a report from the battlefield or a rumour from a traveller. We're looking at the logistical planning for a Tartarian diplomatic delegation to step foot on English soil. The description contains a fascinating and highly specific note that other envoys have only power to buy falcons. This distinction between commercial agents and the high-level diplomatic power of the Vassal brothers proves the complexity of the Tartar bureaucracy. They had trade representatives for luxury goods and they had sovereign envoys for statecraft. The King of England was dealing with both. The location of this record, Viterbo, is equally telling. Viterbo was a frequent resident for popes during this era and not, as is assumed, centred in Rome, which is what I was just saying. The Tartar envoys were operating out of this specific location while negotiating a visit to England suggests a massive coordinated diplomatic network involving the papacy, the English crown and the Khanate. So the Pope's there and these guys are there and they're talking to Edward from Viterbo. Okay, so it weren't even in Rome. And it was like that. They were all over at papal states in them times. It wasn't the Vatican. That the Tartar envoys were operating out of this specific location while negotiating a visit to England suggests a massive coordinated diplomatic network. I've already said that. It confirms that the Tartars were not a localised Asian phenomena. They were a presence in the heart of Europe, moving through the halls of power in Italy and requesting an audience in England. They weren't just on the map, they were in the palace, but the original details of the proposal remains out of reach. Now the next one. Fire Castellan of Chasto Palerin to Edward I. The Tartars proposed to attack Accra. And this is what's dated 1285, 1289, October the 3rd. What does it say? Fire to Castellan, the Tartars proposed to attack Accra, dated at Accra. Okay. So all of a sudden they've decided to attack the Templars. I wonder why. If they're already in with the Pope, and all of a sudden they're looking at attacking the Templars. Why? By the late 1280s, the relationship between the English crown and the Tartar forces had reached a level of operational intimacy. In the above record, reference blah blah blah, we see a direct report from Fire, the Castellan of Chateau Pellerin to Edward I. The subject is specifically a military proposal. The Tartars are planning an attack on Accra. This isn't a vague rumour of troop movements in a distant wilderness, it's a granular intelligence report delivered from a commander of a Crusader fortress directly to the king. Chateau Pellerin was the final stronghold of the Knights Templar. For its commander to be relaying this tactical intention of the Tartars to the King of England suggests a unified command structure. The Tartars weren't just present in the Holy Land, they were the primary military actors whose moves were being tracked and coordinated at the highest levels of Western power. The date between 1285 and 1289 places this dialogue at the very edge of the fall of the Latin Kingdom. While we are told this was a period of fragmentation and retreat, the archives show a sophisticated high-stakes military alliance in full effect. The king was being kept informed of Tartar strikes if they were his own auxiliary forces. So it's clear that Edward I had a serious connection to the Templars, the Christian Templars. But then when the bunch that went into Scotland. The document is described as damage, blah, blah, blah. It proves the Tartars were not merely a background threat or a nomadic curiosity. And then there is just a chart just to give you an idea of what's the difference between the Templars and the Hospitallers. Now the next one, letters of credence to Edward I in favour of Biscarolus di Gisulfo, a citizen of. A citizen of Genoa, envoy of Argonus, king of the Tartars, nuper ad presentium. And that is 1289, September the 30th. This specific record is unique as it's a copy of the letter originally sent by Pope Nicholas IV, authenticating a new diplomatic envoy to the English court. The previous military intelligence was sourced from within the Crusader states. This introduction comes directly from the papacy. The envoy in question is Buscarolo di Gisolfi. Crucially, the description defines him as a citizen of Genoa, but simultaneously the envoy of Argon, or Argonus, king of the Tartars. The bigger picture here is startling. By 1289, the infrastructure of the Tartarian state was sophisticated enough to utilise elite European merchants, citizens of Genoa, to act as their formal diplomatic representatives. Buscarello was operating between the Vatican and the English king, moving through the highest administrative corridors of Europe on behalf of the Khanate. The papal endorsement of Bulla underscores the supreme strategic importance of this diplomacy. It was not a localised matter. The King of England was receiving formal instructions from the Pope regarding the trusted representative of the Tartar king. The alliance that was being discussed in Accra was now being coordinated at the highest levels of faith and state in Europe. While the official timeline scrubs this three-way global dialogue, the archives preserve the credentials of men who built it. The king was not just watching a distant war, he was hosting the Tartar delegates who were planning it. Letters of credence to Edward I. Well, I suppose I'd have to check who had Accra at that time. It could have actually been the Muslims. Letters of credence to Edward I in favour of Sabadin Archeon, envoy of Archon. I don't know what he's saying. What's he say under here? Story deepens as we move into the final decade of the century. The seventh exhibit, dated December 31st, 1290, presents a second set of letters of credence. This time the focus is on a man named Sabedin Archon. Much like Buscalaro before him, Archon is arriving as a formal envoy of Argon, king of the Tartars. The weight of this document lies in its persistence. This was not a one-off meeting or a desperate singular plea. By 1290, the diplomatic channel between the Tartar throne and the English crown had become a standardised recurring operation. The credentials for these envoys were being processed through the highest administrative filters of the era, authenticated by the papacy and delivered to the King of England as a matter of routine state business. Archon's arrival at the end of 1209 signals that the alliance was not fading, it was intensifying. Even as the Crusader presence in the Levant neared its breaking point, the diplomatic machinery remained fully functional. The description notes Bulla missing fragment event, blah 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 blah. When you place this alongside the 1260 request for Edward to persuade his father to resist the invasion, the arc is complete. Within 30 years, the very force that was once described or decried as an existential threat to Christendom had become a power whose ambassadors were regularly introduced to the king by the Pope himself. The records are standing there, indexed and categorised, confirming that Tartarian influence was not a peripheral myth, but a core component of the English crown's foreign policy. The names of these envoys, Buscararo, Archon, and the fingerprints of history that has been systematically overwritten by silence. Now there's one more. And then we just get into a little bit of detail that might just answer a lot of questions. One petition from 38 tenants to Peter Muse, Bishop of Winchester, against the destruction of wood and timber in his manors of Bishops Waltham, Droxford, East Meon, Bishopstoke and Bittern Hants. Letter from the King of Tartars, Chamos Tartarorum, to Sigismund III, King of Poland, 1619. Ooh, we're a long way up there. The last exhibit for today shatters the notion that Tartarian influence was a fleeting medieval anomaly. This record, held within the Lambeth Palace Library under reference, contains a Latin copy of a letter from the King of the Tartars, Chamos Tartarorum, to Sigismund III, King of Poland, 1619. By placing this alongside our first record from 1260, the gravity of the timeline becomes undeniable. We are no longer looking at a 30-year window of diplomacy, we're looking at a continuous recognised state power that spanned at least 350 years. In 1260, the Pope was sounding the alarm. By 1619, well into the early modern period, the Chamos Tartarorum was still engaged in high-level sovereign correspondence with European monarchs. The title Chamos Tartarorum is significant. It is a formal Latinized acknowledgement of a supreme ruler of a specific defined people. While the standard history suggests that the Great Tartary was a disorganized collection of nomadic tribes, that had long since dissolved, this record proves that in the 17th century they were still operating as a singular political entity capable of communicating with the King of Poland as a peer. The context is crucial. 1619 it was on the brink of the 30 Years' War, a period of massive territorial and religious upheavals. That the King of the Tartars remained a relevant active participant in this geopolitical landscape over 3 centuries after Edward I's alliances in Accra suggests a level of institutional longevity that has been completely erased from our maps and our memories. And yeah, of course, I mean, you know, think of it. We've got civil war coming on here any time. East India companies are all on. South America's being robbed. China's on the map. Right. So I think it's pretty clear that there's a lot been going on over there for a lot longer. And remember, the Tartars said they had 2 enemies. The Muscovites, Moscow, and the Rothschilds. And considering the Rothschilds didn't come until later, interesting. I'm just gonna. We don't need to look at that because it just reiterates basically what we've found. So I'd say, have the elites hidden the fact Tartary is not a Scythian enterprise at all? It's an entity of power and contrary to civilization. It is the seat of the Saracens, who were enclosed to the north amongst the Mongols and became the breeding ground for the creed of the anti-life system we know today as Gog and Magog. Is the Mahdi about to rise, backed by Mongol Russia and the captured China? But since the Mohammedan sect held the dominion of those parts, they have universally become Saracens, believing in the false instructions of Muhammad. Now, is this after Rothschilds and the Muscovites have took it? I don't know. Now, here we have a book. Aiton Coris Le Fleur d'Orient. All right, we don't need to talk French. Now, in the book, the narrative suggests that Christianity played a role in the religious life of some groups in that area, and that much of its influence came through St. Thomas. Now, if you've read the Gospel of Thomas, you will know why it was removed from the Bible. Because it's completely in opposition to the idea that you need an institution. I'm very in sync with the notion of you don't need anybody extra of yourself when you come of age, including your mother and father. So if this group over there were influenced by Yeshua through the likes of Thomas, then they would be classed as a Gnostic Christian peoples, would they not? So there's a link. They've took the Christian role on, but it's still at odds with the Church of Peter. And that is very, very insightful, if you ask me. Now, so I put this helps explain why Western civilization might have entertained agreements with the Tartars. The book also makes clear that the original peoples were militarily conquered by the Mongols, and that, with the implementation of the Saracen, Islam became dominant. This raises questions about which Mongol factions offered alliances against the Saracens. Was there genuine opposition to Islamic expansion, which there would have been if they were Gnostic Christians, or was any apparent resistance to ruse to seize power? So was it basically just a method to get into control their opposition? Keep in mind the Venetians were active in this mix. The same mercantile families later exercised great influence over Byzantium, Western monarchs, and eventually the papacy. This is your black nobility. Not only that, the Venetians did ensure Byzantium was handed over to the tribes that would convert to Islam and create the first caliphate in Europe. Under this light, one might ask whether some elite groups adopted a Jewish identity to exert control over the 3 religions rooted in the Torah, and whether the Exolite system and its no-hide laws, while presented as Jewish, serves other political purposes, which is what I've been hinting at all the way through these these things. Now, this is the book, and there's just a few citations that I've put in there. So, short summary. He was a Cilician Armenian noble, monk of the Premonstratensian order, a member of the Hethmud dynasty. He dictated his work at Poitiers at the request of Pope Clement V around 1307. Okay, so this is Templars being knocked off kind of time, while acting as a political intermediary for Armenian and Cypriot interests. So it's divided into 4 books. And then it's sourced, but I've put it up and it's in French. Now here's some excerpts, okay, which are pretty important. The Kingdom of Cathay, which is what it was called, placed at the shores of the ocean, is the largest that can be found in all the world, full of people of infinite riches, and has so many islands under its dominion, which cannot be numbered, that there is no one who affirms having seen them all. Is this the seat of the sea peoples, having domination over so many islands which cannot be numbered? Is it the centre of the sea peoples that attacked Egypt, the Phoenicians, you might say? Have we got things a little bit mixed up? Next episode. The men of those parts are very shrewd and full of every kind of astuteness, in such a way that in the arts and in the sciences they despise all other nations, saying that they alone see with 2 eyes, while the Italians see with only 1. And all other nations are blind, and in truth one sees that they estimate all other nations to be vile and coarse. The men are called Cathians, and one finds according to those nations very beautiful men and very beautiful women. But generally they all have small eyes, and they do not naturally have beards, so they're clearly, but you look at Mongolian, aren't they, kind of thing. Their religion can hardly be described with great difficulty. Some adoring certain idols of metal, others the oxen that work the earth, from which come the grains and the other things that nourish. Others have a veneration in tall trees, others all natural things, some astronomy, many the sun and many the moon. Others have no law nor any faith, and live in the likeness of brute animals, who, although they are of very prompt wit in exercising physical works, they have, however, no cognition of spiritual things. Now that's very like the Khazars, because they used to they used to call you talkers. If you talk too much, they'd kill you, and in that way, it prevented them from learning anything. And I can't remember where I sourced that data, but it's a long time ago. They are not very bold people, but are very timid of death, which does not happen to those who make a profession of arms, all of whom are great wit, both by sea and by land. They have had many victories over their enemies. They have many types of weapons that are not found among other nations. Their currency with which they buy and sell is made of paper, in a square shape, marked with the seal of the king, and according to that seal, it comes to be worth more or less value. And when that money begins to break from antiquity, they carry it to the royal court, and they take other new money instead. Of gold and other metals they make use for vessels and other decorative things. The kingdom of Tartar has 3 provinces, the lords of which call themselves kings, and the men of those parts are called Lagor. They adore idols, as they have always adored until now, except for 10 families of those kings, who, because of the appearance of the star, came to adore the nativity of our Lord in Bethlehem. Wherefore today they are still found among the Tartars, many of those families who constantly hold the faith of Christ. From the north it has the great and very long desert of India, where it is said that Alexander the emperor found so many serpents, and such diversity of animals. St. Thomas, the apostle, preached in that country the faith of Christ. who converted many provinces and peoples, who being very distant from those lands and places where the faith of Christ was held, have abandoned the faith, it not being that there was a single city that was inhabited by the Christians, all others having abandoned the faith of ours. The largest city of the kingdom of Cumania is called Sara, which anciently was very noble and famous before it was ruined. It is almost entirely destroyed by the Tartars, who took it by force. But since the Mohammedan sect held the dominion of those parts, they have universally become Saracens, believing in the false instructions of Mahomet. And those are the two links to the books. Now, I probably could have put more in there, and maybe I'll expand on it later when I get an English copy of that book. Now, here's just data about Edward III, which you might find interesting, because that was basically the birth of the chivalric orders. Because coming on the back of all that, you know, the Templars, the Hospitallers, the Crusades, we get to see a better picture of what it is that actually formed our England through the Plantagenets. And of course, Ivan Talbot is a surviving Plantagenet. He is the King of England on lineage, proven by every method, acknowledged by Queen Elizabeth II. He is the rightful king of England. So, you know, we do have that side of things still available to us. First, we have to take back service of law and begin to see it not as theirs and not ours, but it is ours, and we need to help them remember what law is as opposed to what the statutes are. So you can see my shift in everything in this last, couple of years, I suppose, but definitely so in the last 6 or 8 months. So I've now shifted the way I approach the whole matter. And instead of it being from a standpoint of war, we need to start looking at how we can all work together. Because they are as trapped as we are. There are bad apples amongst them, but there are bad apples amongst us, is there not? So, you know, it's a level playing field, is what I'm suggesting we look for. So let's have a look. It looks like you've been chit-chatting. Right, so interaction, that's shown versus Copper with the knocker. Copper saying, she'll clean hands, respect and everything because blah, blah, blah. Yep. Yep. Right, chaps. Thanks for listening for that. It went a little bit over. But I think you get the picture that it's presenting there. There's a lot more that we don't know and a lot more that we need to know. And the fact that all this New World Order appears to be based over that side, and I've been saying for aeons, there's a lot more going on over there than we realise. Have the Saracens taken over that area, made so by those that called themselves rabbinical Jews, and from there they're being formed into this scapegoat position in order to satisfy the intentions of these rabbinical Jews in cleansing the world of its people. Of course, they're only doing one part. Their game comes next because China's made it very clear. They see Islam as a mental illness, and there you get you wiped off the face of the earth. You've got the prophecies in relation to the Euphrates drying up. 200 million soldiers start to march across. Well, if they're going to start marching across there, ladies and gentlemen, it's the Muslims that they're going to be killing, because they're a long way from Europe at the Euphrates. So there's so much going on here. It's up to people that call themselves Christians to start to see, people that call themselves Jews that start to see, and people that call themselves Muslims. It's time you started to see as well. Because at the moment, everybody's running on ignorance, emotion, and garbage. Belief is a dangerous thing if used as a conclusion. It is only cause to continue to study. That's what belief is. It's the cause to continue until you know. And on that I shall say thanks for joining, mods. Thanks for modding. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, I shall say, till the next time.
Electronic.